this. I'm going to read to you all. I asked Mark for his bio, so I want to make sure to get some of the background stuff to make sure that you had a good appreciation of what we got a few years ago. So I'm going to read a little bit from the announcement that was made when Mark accepted his position here. So, Middlebury College has appointed an ordained Presbyterian minister with 24 years of experience as a university chaplain, Mark Orten, as director of the Scott Center for Spiritual and Religious Life and dean of Spiritual and Religious Life. Orten most recently served 13 years as director of the Center for Religious and Spiritual Life and university chaplain at Denison University, where he implemented an interfaith dialogue program, organized interreligious education and service trips to Guatemala and India, and oversaw the creation of a multi-faith facility called the Open House. Prior to his appointment at Denison, Mark was the Presbyterian chaplain at Princeton University from 1992 to 2003. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a Master of Divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary. Mark will engage the Middlebury campus in exploring the roles of religion, spirituality, contemplation, and action in the quest for meaningful lives, and for promoting vibrant multi-faith dialogue and cooperation throughout the community, said Katie Smith-Abbott, VP for Student Affairs. Mark has done that and more already in the short 2 years he's been here. He's been here for 2 years now, and he lives here with his wife and his 4 daughters, who are just beautiful, all 5 of them. And they also have a dog and a cat. I didn't know that. Both rescues, and he said he's tried skiing for both winters. He added that to me. I wonder what that's all about.
Never too old to learn.
But, okay, you ready for the question?
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah, what matters to you, Mark?
I thought this was a talk about environmental stuff. Humor matters. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and it's great to be here. It's funny to be reminded of the language that is used upon your arrival as a sort of a job description. Makes you think about how we stay on the track. So what matters to me is incredibly difficult to name in a short span of time. So I thought I would try to name a couple of things in sort of one-word snippets with brief descriptions that would give a sense of it, and then we can go from there depending on how the questions go in the course of the time. But I listed 10 things. I wanted to take one away or add one because you should never go with never trust a list of 10. 9 or 11 you can trust, but 10's like a family, of course. Process. The only way that change really occurs is when the process reflects the desired result. So process is incredibly important to me, and not in just a colloquial or shallow sense, but the path we are on is our path. We are the path. So that's important to me. Solitude is another thing that's important to me, that matters to me. The landscape of the interior is that which reflects the exterior. It's that on which the exterior resides. So the interior is incredibly important and matters to me. Affirmation matters to me. My parents were profuse with sometimes empty and therefore meaningless platitudes at times. I think sometimes they were prone to that when I was younger, or they were too preoccupied sometimes to give recognition. And I'm really working hard in my adult life to counter that and to be one who gives affirmation in ways that are meaningful to me. So that matters. Dialogue matters to me. Until we listen deeply enough to be changed by what we hear, we aren't listening at all, really. And our greatest longing, I think sometimes the greatest, deepest human longing, is to be heard. And I mean heard in the whole sense of the word, to be received, to be welcomed, to be held. So listening to me is a way of that. It's a beginning. So dialogue includes that as its first principle. Integrity of the whole matters to me. Despite a profound respect for mystery, I love the fact that there are some things that we cannot explain. There are, perhaps some of the most important things in the world are rooted in mystery, but I still believe everything coheres. There's some explanation. I may say a little more about that later, but there is a profound relationship between that which we do not know and a trust I think we can have that everything coheres. That is my theology. Integrity of the whole matters. These are not in order of preference, by the way. Communication matters to me. My children will tell you that I use the expression a lot, close the loop, meaning when we say come to dinner, that they close that loop. We've opened a line of communication. Would you please let us know you've heard us and say, okay, Daddy, okay, Mom, we're coming to dinner. Rather than just beginning to put away whatever they're doing and making their way there. And I think that might be a principle in this culture, in today's world, society, that is maybe being lost, that could help us all. We've RSVPs. That's a French, it's an acronym for respond, s'il vous plaît, if you please. Meaning, let me at least know. A holy no is okay. To say no is okay, but to say something is imperative. So close the loop, that matters to me. And I am not a paragon of any of these things. They just matter to me. I'm still working on trying to do it. I should say that. Consideration matters to me. The only bumper sticker I've ever been brave enough to put on my car was recently, because Vermonters do it. They didn't do it in Ohio, where I came from, or New Jersey, really, before that. But I have a bumper sticker in my car that one of my daughters gave me for Christmas. And it just says simply, be kind, because she knows that matters to me. And so consideration is important. Now you all know which car in the parking lot. Community and connectedness. I may also say more about this later, but the Sangha in the Buddhist tradition, the community gathering with other people is important. I'm an introvert and I believe in solitude, but I also think we need regular, intentional moments and times with one another. I don't think we can exist healthily without it. And so I'm all about creating spaces, making friends. I think about things like tea houses and yurts for Middlebury, except I'm just giving you away my proposals for the traditions contest. I think we need more and more spaces like this, actually, and I'm grateful for this kind of space that's been offered for us to be together in community and connectedness. And then finally, ritual matters to me. And what I wrote in here is how else will we remember? I believe that we have to repeat and attend to the fires that burn in us, or else they go out. And so regular returning to those things that matter, and for me that's ritual, but it takes all different forms. I have personal rituals, I have communal rituals, little secret things others might call tics. They all help remind me of who I am and what matters to me. So that's my list. I could go on.
That's a wonderful list. You come off as being someone who is very present, very much with the person you're communicating with or the group. And I think there's a lot of us who admire that as well as appreciate it. And then you talk about, it came out in some of your bullets, how, and I know that mindfulness is very important to you, and being proactive. Mindfulness is a verb. So can you tell us how, not only tell us why it's important to you, bless you, but also talk about, you were intimating that there were a few things you did that maybe were tricks for you or were things you wanted to form as habits. Can you share with us some of those things and why it is important to you and what you've done to incorporate it into your life?
So, thanks for the words about presence. I do think that the question about mindfulness and those practices in my life has to do with ways to be present to what is. And mindfulness is a relatively recent phenomenon as a word, as a concept. I'm sure it's been around for a while. It's gained popularity more recently. But it's not an appropriation. It's a way of recognizing in a whole new set of, a whole new package, really. Some of the things that have existed for thousands of years in many different traditions and cultures around the world. Some of which I have been very blessed to have been born into. So my appreciation for community and for ritual and for solitude, those are all elements of faithful life that for me came out of growing up in the Christian tradition in the U.S. And some of the more significant moments in my life were moments when I recognized that that was not unique to me or to my own tradition, but rather there in all traditions and all cultures in some form and common to most all people. So when you ask the question about that, the mindfulness for me has been coming to terms or recognizing those things that I thought were in some ways just sort of separate spiritual practices that I did to be a good person or a better person or to be more identifiable as such and such. But rather, and this has been my wonderful engagement with Buddhism most recently, that all of life is infused with that sort of sacredness. And those particular practices are ways of returning, remembering that. But ultimately what we're after is a way of being in the world that is fully present. And not present to what we want things to be or what we wish things were, but to what actually is. And that is enough. There's a profound philosophy of life that goes with that in the Buddhist tradition that I continually engage, that in some ways makes a lot of sense and in others challenges me. But as a concept, so far as that goes, that makes a huge difference in my life. So yeah, my journey has been one of trying to be continually honest and realistic and present to what actually is, including the person who's in front of me. And again, I don't do this perfectly, no, none of us does, but I'm beginning to see some things that make me want to be a monk. Well, I've made this joke before, I sometimes feel like a monk on the freeway. And you can imagine, there's a picture of a monk kind of huddled over a little, not a very fancy car, but kind of going down the freeway and not very fast, and not knowing to use turn signals or staying in the right lane or whatever, but smiling, this beautiful smile, like, oh my gosh, look what's wrong with it. And that's not really fair to what I'm trying to say, but there's just too much stimulation, and we just keep looking for more and asking for more, when in fact the thing that's right in front of us, even just inside of us, is enough to give all the joy we could wish for in the world, and all the insight that we need for living is right there. And so going deeper instead of farther, being more present instead of faster, it's reconditioning me, even at the age of 52, which used to sound really old to me, and now it feels like the beginning of something new. That didn't really answer your question.
No,
there are specific practices I could name.
But before we go there, why do you find it more and more important as we get older? Like, why that?
Well, I don't think it's more important. I just think that's what... there was a part of me that thought, why am I applying for this job? Wouldn't they do better to have someone closer to the age of students, whose perspective is fresh, whose education, the things they wrote and read about are closer to, the most contemporary stuff. And then I think, I think that with age, we also still have something to offer. You and I talked a little bit about this in another vein, but there is something to be said for the multi-generational ways of being in the world, and also the sort of insight that we have as older. And it behooves those in other generations to recognize that and come alongside it. But I don't think I can discount, where I am in my life. And so it's just the thing that comes with my present age that is not more significant, but I think maybe takes some time. There's some people who have amazing wisdom and insight early in their lives, but nothing replaces experience. There's just no way to know, unless maybe you're the Dalai Lama.
No, thank you. A question that I think has come up in other Reflection Fridays, and it's kind of the topic on campus as it is everywhere, but is how to juggle things, especially when you're someone like yourself who has so many things that are important, and you're an empath and you care about people, and how have you learned how to juggle, our family calls them the big rocks, the things that are most important to you. How do you do that when there's so many demands on our time?
You ask Ellen. Or Alex, who's so efficient that she could take time off from work in the office to come here. Yeah, really glad to have them here. It's a great question. I don't do it well. I still feel like I get caught up with things that are not the big rocks. But it's a great, I've heard that expression before. And it is true that if you don't put the big things in first, you can't get to the other. She has a thing that she has to go to, she told me. It's not
an indication of my interest.
I hope it goes.
I'll call you later, Heather.
It's sort of about not strategies for prioritizing, but rather recognizing, as I just named, these things, and knowing that if those things are intact, then I am doing the right things. So if I wrote, it's sort of like, how do you know when to put your coat on? Would be another way of thinking about that. By paying attention to when I'm cold and when I'm warm. So if things are not cohering, if I'm not attending to dialogue, if I'm not having requisite moments of solitude, then I know that I'm off-center. I just know things, you get, and that comes again with experience. You just start getting to a place where you say, I know what it feels like when things are right, and this is not it. Even in a conversation, I can sometimes feel like, I'm over-engaging here. And I know that because I've done it enough times that I reflect on it and know that feeling. So you come to know that if certain qualities are not present, that's the time to reflect and to adjust. And for me, that means not skipping my morning meditation, but actually assuring that it happens. Because the temptation is to say, I need to do something else in that time that would get me, I'd be more prepared for the day. Or I really should have written that note to that person. But no, I need to make sure I carve out that time where I can be still enough to let all those other things settle and come to terms with what actually is going on. And then I'm ready to go into the day. And if I don't do that in the mornings, I know it all day long. So that's really important to me, those regular times to stop, to reflect, to let things settle, and to pay attention, to observe, among other things that happen there. And that time also can also include time for prayer, which is my own tradition, to acknowledge some petition or some affirmation, some gratitude. Those are also parts of my meditation. meditation. Principles of yoga help me prioritize and focus. I don't practice yoga as regularly as I meditate, but I'd like to get back to it. And I did it one time. We go through seasons, but the yamas and the niyamas, for those of you who know yoga, they're the ethical and moral principles of the first two principles that the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. There are things like ahimsa, which is the first principle of the yama of non-violence. So that's something that matters to me. It's important, and I try to make sure that whatever behavior I'm engaging in is principled in non-violence. So that could mean something like getting angry with my father for, neglecting to tell me about an appointment that he had or something like that. Is my reaction rooted in non-violence? And I don't mean passivity, I mean non-violence, because violence to ourselves is also a kind of violence. Satya, when the events on campus happened last spring, one of the first things that came to me as a possible response, not only for myself, but also for the Scott Center, for the campus, was that we weren't necessarily hearing one another's truths, which is what Satya means. That's the principle of truth-telling and truth-hearing. We weren't hearing each other's truths. So we created in the Scott Center Satya circles, which were essentially dialogue circles, but they were based on the concept of essentially hearing from others. This is how the events of this time are impacting me. Until we actually hear about that impact, we can't engage honestly. So that helps me to juggle things, is to pay attention to some of those principles. And it all depends on regular practice and the knowledge of the things. And then the last thing I would say is the rituals. I have a bell on my desk that I quietly, sometimes if I start feeling really anxious, I'll just reach over and ring the bell and wait until the sound fully dissipates. And that has actually been shown physiologically to have an impact on us. It is calming to us. But it also just creates some space, some natural space to pause and let other things occur than the things that the monkey mind, this agitated, frenetic, desperate mind tries to dictate. During that time, everything's okay. That's the only place I need to be, is right there with that bell for that short period of time. But then other rituals like lighting incense and walking through the office, just having a different smell, changing the senses of the place. We have a labyrinth on campus now, and just going to walk the labyrinth as a unicursal path to the middle and back again, setting an intention, giving thanks after it's over, observing what happens in the process of walking that meditative path. That's so important. Going to church on Sundays. My family and I, we go to church. It feels so arcane, and what's the guy who does those paintings of really standard American? Norman Rockwell. I feel like I'm living a Norman Rockwell picture. I'm walking to church with my 4 daughters, and we get dressed up and all this stuff, and I know that we're participating in something that could be seen as an opiate of the masses, that just is like mind-numbing. And yet, every week, it just infuses me with a renewed appreciation for so many things in life that are important to me, and not in a numbing way. It awakens me, it reminds me. And it's so important. And I think, I don't know how people do without it. Not church, but without those moments of regular gathering with other people to just, in whatever way, to be reminded of what's important. And that could be a cycling club that's intentional. There's some intentionality required. But, yeah. Now I feel like I'm rambling.
No, that was good ramble.
Thanks.
A question that I wanted to ask you, because you're an ordained minister, and you hear a lot about being called to service. some of us who aren't religious still feel called
Yeah.
to do service. And I just wondered if there was a time when something that occurred that made you want to pivot, something that in your past where you just had that moment. Oprah says an aha moment. You know, everyone defines it in a different way, but this time when you went, oh, okay, I got to change things up. I gotta move to something else.
Yeah, I mean, with regard to vocation, those have been the most wonderful moments of people just, or things saying, invitation that was so compelling to me. I haven't ever really strived for something. I just always felt drawn and tried to go for it, but it was almost like the match was already there, or I wouldn't have been pulled toward it somehow. But there were a couple of moments, and this could take forever, but I'll just say, I remember one time when I was about 10 years old in the front lawn of my yard, way out in the middle of nowhere on a farm, down a dirt road in Fairview, North Carolina, the mountains of North Carolina. There were no children to play with, and my brothers wouldn't play with me, so I just was throwing a baseball as high as I could, and still be able to catch it. So that was just a thing, and somehow that let my mind just, and I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of everything belongs. Everything's connected. I was one with the universe with this ball going up and coming down. I'll never forget this moment of complete integration. And that felt to me like my life was held. And whatever happened, there was meaning enough. There was purpose enough. And I'll never be able to explain that, but it's been with me my whole life. And has manifested in other ways, other forms throughout. Then there was a time when I grew up in a really conservative Christian fundamentalist background that didn't really get how things worked outside of the little bubble. And I was working at a camp, and this older gentleman, saw potential in me and invited me on a short trip up to Yale Divinity School. We got on a train in Madison, North Carolina, went up to Yale Divinity School. I'd never been any place like that at all. And he had me sit with him through a series of lectures that were among the finest lectures in the world, the series, the Lyman Beecher lectures. And I'll never forget some of the things that were said. I could tell you the longer version of the story, but it gave me a sense that there was much more in the world than what I had known before, and that my life was destined for that. And so I've always been pulled to that. So I applied to Princeton Seminary, of all places, when all the people in my world would have said, oh, they're way too liberal, and they'll ruin your faith and all that. It was total opposite for me. It was just an amazing journey for me. And then also on the way to that, I would say there was a moment in a class in college at Chapel Hill when I'll never forget William Peck. He was near the end of his career. He wrote the word phenomenology on the board and then drew a bracket around it and said, when we're talking about religious experience, we have to look at it phenomenologically, which means we bracket certain things and we set them aside and we look at them for what they are apart from the context, so that we can then reinsert them appropriately in the context. And in that moment, I realized that I pray one way and others pray other ways, but phenomenologically, we're all doing these different prostrations or gyrations or whatever. Those are just different human manifestations of the same impulse towards something. And I always thought prayer was only one thing and everybody needed to do it and it had to go in one direction. And now I know that we all pray in so many different ways, and I can see that now because William Peck taught me phenomenology. And that was a moment in college that changed my life forever. So I used to say I didn't study theology in seminary so much as anthropology. It's really sociology, anthropology that we're studying when we talk about religion and religious experience. And I'll stop with that for that.
I'm thinking we should open it up and see if there's any questions from any of you. Anyone have any questions for Mark? Okay.
I'd like to hear your views on anger. We have a lot of angry people on campus and sort of rightfully angry about things that have happened, a lot of students in particular. And, and I hear your messages about dialogue and process and listening and sort of a stillness. But I also feel like anger is really important for change. And anger represents people not feeling integrated. So that moment that you had of like real integration, I think there are people here who don't feel integrated. And, so I personally feel like anger is both productive and problematic for both the angry person and the person who wants to hear the angry people's message. So I'm curious what you have to say about anger.
It's a great question, and you already revealed some really wonderful dimensions of it, I think. My own belief and experience perception of it is that what you're asking about in terms of anger is this impulse that comes when we see something that is not right or unjust or imbalanced. And that, I think, is rooted in something that is profoundly true and good, that there are shoulds in the world. Where that impulse goes from there is a whole different matter. And in mindfulness practice, we say it's not the thing itself, but the story we tell about it that makes the difference in our emotions. So if I'm sitting in traffic and the person in front of me is taking their own sweet time and I need to get somewhere, I can tell myself the story, I'm late and this guy's the reason and I'm mad about that. That's a real thing. But the other part of the story that could be told is, I'm a healthy individual with an amazing family and an awful lot of things that will take care of me even though I may be late to whatever it is I'm going to. That's gonna be okay. It may not even be that. I hate being late for things, but it might be okay if I'm late. In fact, I might actually engage someone or something that I otherwise would not have. And so it's shifting the story. Now that doesn't take care of things like social injustice or things like that. And those are things where I think sometimes we get outside of ourselves and the anger is a reflection of taking a different responsibility than we actually appropriately can. There is only so much we can do. And so for us to be aligned properly with what's going on might just merely be to bear honest witness to it. To be able to say, that should not be. And to say, I see that, I acknowledge that. But if I feel an anger that's attached to a certain result, it's attachment to a certain result, or fear that I'm somehow going to be left out or something's not going to happen that I want to happen, then if I behave according to those things, I may miss the most effective and the most powerful response I could have. There's a wonderful story about an older gentleman who goes up, and when people think that the older gentleman is going to tap this young, tattooed, wild-looking boy and say, you don't belong here, but instead puts his cane down on the floor and sits down next to him to say, let's be here together. I didn't tell the whole story, but you get the sense of it. It takes a certain presence about what's actually happening in a thing to give the proper response that truly addresses what's happening, truly will affect change, and rather than take the responsibility for all the stuff and put it on our own shoulders and try to champion that. We get outside of ourselves when we let those emotions take root in a different way. There's so much more I know we could say back and forth, but that gives you at least a window. I'd love to talk more about it, but I think that it's an indication of something that's not right, and then where we go from there has to be rooted in a kind of realization that I don't see around. And it takes the most profound wisdom and the most profound confidence and assurance to be able to move through it a different way. We've got to find that way. We just have to find, so we stand for what's important. We create circles. And we keep going with the dialogue, even though people might say, oh, that's stupid, that's passive, that's ineffectual. It's been over-tried and it doesn't work. I know that not to be true, and so I just keep my loins girded and move through it. I just bear witness to what I know to be true. And always open to the fact that I may be wrong. I may be wrong, and I may still learn someday that something else is a better way. Is that okay?
That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I do get angry.
Another question?
In case there are your students who want to say something, I want.
Go for it, it's okay.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how you use solitude.
Yeah. Just there in that moment when you asked are there other questions, I could feel, I know better, but I could feel an awkwardness in the silence. And then I caught myself and thought, no, silence is precious. We don't have enough of it. And silence doesn't mean people aren't fully engaged or actively thinking. It means that the process is going on in a different way. And so solitude is that for me. If I don't find certain times to be alone, I get really agitated, just nervous. So that's just a symptom of what I consider to be my need for silence. But I used to take at least twice a year to go away for a week by myself. And then I began to have more responsibilities like family and things, so I can't do that as much. But even recently, I asked permission of my family and they granted that I could go away for 24 hours, and I went to the Silver Bay YMCA over in Lake George, and I had to go through the most terrible snowstorm to get there. Every mile of that was like, what are you doing? Your family's back there, you're going to this thing. Why are you pushing so hard for this? But once I got there, I found a book on the shelf in their library that just drew me in, and for 3 hours I sat there while the snow came down outside, and it was a gift that I did not know I was giving myself, but I absolutely needed to give permission to let what emerged in that time. Then I ended up talking to a couple of staff people around the meal, and that was really amazing. I thought that I didn't want to talk to anybody, but those conversations really impacted me. But I had to create the space, push things away, and be intentional about it, and actually a little bit forceful about it. And then the gift was given. It's a gift. And you can't know, you can't design it. That's the whole thing, is you let the busyness settle so that you can see what is actually there. And if you're trying to create a certain thing by going away, by being silent, then you're just still doing. We're human beings, not human doings. So it's creating an opportunity to be. Others have heard that expression, but yeah, I feel like there's more to say. But that's, it's a principle worth coveting, being alone, even if we're not introverted, and then to try to be able to receive the gift that it offers.
I'm not sure that I know how to phrase this even, but something that I have grown up with is a very unhealthy skepticism of organized religion. My sort of extended family is religious and Hindu, but I grew up very critical of it for a lot of reasons and for a lot of the ways in which religion and politics can intersect. But listening to you talk about your faith was really wonderful and reminds me why it can be a really powerful thing for some folks. But I was wondering how you wrestle with the sort of personal and individuality of faith and community of faith versus the politics of faith.
Yes, it's a wonderful question, and I do wrestle with that, and I think we should wrestle with it, because the key is that word organized. Organized religion means someone is organizing, and when it has that kind of power, the potential for abuse is always there, or misuse. And I think that's what people are usually referring to when they eschew organized religion, is all of the potential for moving people in ways or doing things that are not intended by the religion itself. But religion, I mean, it comes from the same word as from which we get ligament, ligare, ligio, connected. Religion is just meant to be a way in which the personal, spiritual dimensions of our beings connect to others, so that when we practice a ritual together, or we sit together, or we look in the same direction, or we sing a song together, or whatever we're doing, we're connecting. It's the namaste. It's the divinity in me greeting and meeting the divinity in you. And so we form ways for that to happen. And that's how you know when a religion has lost its way, is when it begins to deny people their individuality, or if there can't be opportunities for expression, full expression, and denied on the basis of gender or sexual orientation or things like that. I think that's when we begin to question, is this religion being true to its own principles and foundations? But when we are able to accept and acknowledge that things can be abused and misused, then we can also be able to fully appreciate and enjoy that which they do offer, the gifts that they do give. And that's how I try to do it. So I see in my own congregation, in my own denomination, in my own religion, and even in my other clergy colleagues, I see the times when certain things are not as they should be. And I also see this wonderfully genuine motivation that is the origin of it. And I try to just be mindful of those things. Yeah, it's a great question. Much more could be said.
Same preface that Gia has. I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase this exactly right. Might be often terms ministry, pastor, whatever, but how does your current position, how do you balance, you went to seminary school and became an ordained minister, and some of I was thinking, this question popped in my head when I was listening to the introduction, where when you're at a dentistery company in Middlebury, you have this role of being, this is where I'm not sure if I have the right words, the minister or chaplain, thank you. So you're a chaplain, and then you're a multi-denominational dean, and then you have your congregation where you go and you're not passive, but you're pastor is the pastor, and you're now a congregant. Thank you.
Yes.
So how do all those things? What's the intersection of those things? Are you? And do you miss? You went into. You became an ordained minister, and now you're a dean at a college. Do you miss some of the ministry, sitting at the front of the congregation in robes? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, where people
it makes sense in my mind. It doesn't make as much sense.
Yeah, the end of your question is too tempting. I'd love to be in a congregation where what I say goes, and where people don't question my existence and think, is he on the up and up, that kind of thing. But no, I wouldn't. That wouldn't be the place for me. it's a great place to be, and many people inhabit it well. My love and joy for this, and part of the answer to your question, for this role is that it's the coming alongsidedness. It's the only way I know to say it, coming alongsidedness, that I have to draw on my own beliefs and practices and rich experiences and traditions to know how it is one comes alongside another and encourages, advocates, cajoles, challenges, supports, loves. All of those are different expressions of the profession, of the calling, the vocation, that are part of, they're what defines the way I think of a chaplain. And so even administration is that way. It's ministry added on. Administration is a kind of ministry. And to do that well, to close loops and to follow through and to be incisive about what's a priority in a position, those are all part of my calling as a minister and part of being good, being right. But the mixture of roles, absolutely, that's to move from one role to another in the course of my days. We do that. I mean, I could ask you the question about being a son and a father and a brother all at the same time. You do each one relative to the context you're in, but being one in one context doesn't make you less of the other in another. You're still all the same. So I'm an atheist and a theologian at the same time because those are all in me. I have moments of deep question and doubt and whatever. And then I also have moments of just amazing trust and abiding love and joy. They're both in me. So I can't define myself altogether as one or the other. Yeah. So I come alongside others with the knowledge of all.
I think that's a really nice note to end on.
Yeah,
Having more questions. Thank you so much for coming, Mark.
Thanks for your warm invitation.
Yeah, happy to have you. Thank you for moderating this.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.